1811, England. Imagine spending years mastering a skill that feeds your family. Then one day, someone builds a machine that allows a cheaper worker to do what once required you. Your experience doesn't disappear. Your knowledge doesn't disappear. But suddenly, the economy doesn't value either of them the way it used to. Sound familiar? Because more than 2 centuries before workers worried about artificial intelligence, English textile workers were confronting their own automation crisis. And some of them decided the machines had to die. They became known as the Luddites. Today, Luddite is usually an insult. It means someone who hates technology, someone afraid of progress. But that version of the story misses what made the Luddites so dangerous. Many were skilled textile workers, croppers, weavers, stocking makers, people whose livelihoods depended on knowledge accumulated over years. And during the early 19th century, Britain's textile industry was changing. New machinery and new production methods allowed manufacturers to reorganize work, reduce their dependence on certain skilled trades, and employ cheaper labor. To the manufacturer, this could mean greater output and lower costs. To the worker whose bargaining power depended on his skill, it could mean something very different. A machine didn't need to hate him. It didn't need to understand his job. It only needed to make his labor less valuable. And that distinction matters, because the Luddites were not simply smashing every new invention they could find. Their attacks were often directed at particular machines and particular employers, associated with practices they believed were destroying their trades and wages. This wasn't a random war against technology. It was a fight over who benefited from technological change. But there was another problem. Workers couldn't simply organize the way they might today. Trade unions faced severe legal restrictions. Collective action could bring prosecution. So resistance moved underground. Meetings happened secretly. Threatening letters appeared. And those letters were sometimes signed by someone who wasn't really there. Ned Ludd, or General Ludd, or King Ludd. The name became a fictional leader for a movement without one obvious commander. And then, after darkness fell, men began moving toward the mills. They carried hammers. Not because they didn't understand the machines, because they understood exactly what those machines represented. Groups entered workshops and factories and destroyed targeted machinery. Frames were broken, wood splintered, metal was smashed. Then the attackers disappeared back into the night. And suddenly Britain had a serious problem. Because destroying a machine wasn't merely destroying someone's property. Industrialization was becoming part of Britain's economic future. If organized workers could stop new production systems by physically destroying them, the conflict threatened something much larger than a few factory owners. So the government responded with force. In 1812, Parliament made machine breaking a capital offense under the Frame Breaking Act. Think about what that meant. Destroy the machine threatening your livelihood, and the state could threaten your life. But even that didn't immediately end the rebellion. In some places, machine breaking escalated into armed confrontation. Troops were deployed. Suspected Luddites were hunted. Informers penetrated communities. Men were arrested. Some were executed. Others were transported overseas. And eventually the movement was crushed. The machines remained. Industrialization continued. And the people who tried to stop part of that transformation became remembered by one word: Luddite. For 200 years, that word has made the story seem simple. Progress arrived. Ignorant workers became frightened. They smashed machines. Progress won. But look closer and the story becomes much more uncomfortable. The Luddites weren't asking whether technology could make production more efficient. They were confronting a different question. What happens to the person whose economic value the technology reduces? And that question never disappeared. The machines simply changed. The mechanical frames of 19th century England eventually became electricity, assembly lines, computers, industrial robots, software, and now artificial intelligence. The comparison isn't perfect. History almost never repeats that neatly, but the conflict underneath it is recognizable. A company discovers that technology can perform work differently. The economics of that work change. Some people gain enormous leverage. Others discover that years of accumulated experience no longer guarantee the security they expected. And once that happens, telling those people that technology represents progress doesn't answer the question they're actually asking. Progress for whom? The Luddites tried to answer that question with hammers. They lost, but the question survived them. And 2 centuries later, we're asking it again. This time, the machine isn't standing inside a textile mill. It can write, it can code, it can analyze, it can design. And it is improving while millions of people are still trying to understand what that means for the value of their own work. So perhaps the strangest thing about the Luddites isn't how different they were from us. It's how familiar their fear has become. The machines changed. The question didn't.